I didn't plan on telling any of this. For a long time, I kept it boxed up as weird things that happened on the trail, something I could almost laugh about if I never let myself sit with it too long. But lately, every time I drive past a tree line or see a hiking photo online, the same tight feeling crawls up the back of my neck, like something from those trips is still walking just a few steps behind me. People talk about hiking like it's therapy. Fresh air, quiet, being alone with your thoughts. And it can feel like that at first. The forest will welcome you in, let you breathe a little easier, let your brain finally shut up under all that green and silence. But if you stay long enough, you start to notice the parts no one posts pictures of. The places where the trail goes strangely quiet. The stretches where birds stop making noise mid-song. The way shadows seem to lean in just a little too far when you pass. The first time I realized something was wrong, it wasn't because I saw a monster or heard some inhuman sound. It was because of a man. At least, I think he was a man. I was alone on a narrow trail, miles from the nearest road, when I heard wood splintering over and over ahead of me, like somebody taking a swing at the trees just to hear them break. Every instinct in me said to turn around. Instead, I kept going, and walked into something that did not feel like an accident, or a random stranger just blowing off steam. That should have been enough to make me stop going into the woods alone. It wasn't. Another time, in a different state, the forest felt wrong in a quieter way. I got turned around, and before I knew it, the trail markers were gone. The air had that heavy, padded feeling, like a blanket over your ears. Then I realized I wasn't alone. There were shapes pacing me in the trees, light catching yellow in their eyes. Wolves. I could hear them breathing, hear twigs snapping just out of sight. I was sure that was how I was going to die, but instead of getting closer, they backed off, one by one, like something else had just stepped into the clearing, something they knew to avoid. Another trip, another forest. Different friends, different campsite, same sense that something was just slightly off, like stepping into a room right after someone's been arguing. We joked about feeling watched, because that's what you do when you don't want to admit you're actually scared. But the laugh sounded thin, and none of us wanted to say out loud what we were all thinking. Someone was out there. Not an animal, not a ranger. Someone who knew that once the sun went down, the only light for miles would be our fire and whatever they brought with them. If these were just stories about creepy vibes in the woods, I wouldn't be here talking about them. The man I met on that narrow trail didn't just stare and walk away. The thing that scared off those wolves didn't just disappear, and the person or people circling our campsite in the dark weren't content with staying in the trees forever. I'm telling this now because I've started to notice a pattern. It took me years to connect the dots, but once I did, it stopped feeling like bad luck and started feeling like something else. Like there are places out there that don't want you in them, and if you step over whatever invisible line they've drawn, they will do everything they can to push you back out, or keep you there. If you're the kind of person who likes hiking alone, who loves that feeling of being the only human for miles, you might think you understand the silence of the forest. You don't. Not yet. You know the peaceful kind. You know the kind that lets you breathe. You probably haven't met the other kind, the silence that waits, and watches, and closes in behind you after you pass. These are 3 trips I took into that kind of silence. 3 times I thought I was just out to clear my head, get some exercise, enjoy nature. I didn't realize until it was too late that something else was out there using the same trails, watching the same tree lines, listening to the same crunch of gravel under my boots, and that it was paying very close attention to who walked in alone and who never came back out the same. The first thing I remember is the light thin, milky, filtered through a ceiling of late summer leaves. It was one of those mornings when the forest feels gentle, almost soft around the edges, like it's trying to lull you into a false sense of calm. My boots were still damp from crossing a creek earlier, and each step left a darker print along the packed dirt trail. I wasn't thinking about anything serious, just walking, breathing, letting the quiet settle into me the way it usually did on solo hikes. Then the sound hit me, a sharp crack in the distance. Not like a branch falling, Not like a squirrel knocking something loose. This was forceful, deliberate, steel meeting wood, and then again harder, a grunt behind it. I stopped mid-step. The entire trail seemed to freeze with me. Even the bugs went quiet. I've passed plenty of strangers on hikes before, but something about this didn't feel like another hiker. There's a rhythm to footsteps, to conversation, to human presence. What I heard had none of that. It was slow, heavy, one strike at a time, with long, unnatural pauses between each blow. My backpack strap creaked when I adjusted it, and that small noise felt too loud in the stillness. I kept walking anyway, even though everything in me wanted to turn around. Curiosity, stupidity sometimes, they feel exactly the same. As I got closer, I caught the first movement through the trees. A shape, big shoulders. A long handle, rising and falling in a slow, almost casual rhythm. He wasn't chopping firewood. He wasn't clearing the trail. He was swinging the axe into a tree that didn't need cutting, driving the blade in at shoulder height again and again like he was testing the weight of it. The man stopped mid-swing, axe buried halfway into the bark, and then he turned. He didn't lift his head, his chin stayed tucked toward his chest, but his eyes found me anyway, peering through strands of dirty hair. They were wide and strangely bright, like he'd waited a long time for someone to appear. I froze. For a moment, neither of us moved. The forest didn't either. It felt like everything was leaning inward to see what would happen next. Then he smiled. Not with his mouth, with his eyes. A slow tension crawled up my spine, cold as if someone exhaled on the back of my neck. I took one step back. He took one step forward. The axe handle groaned as he yanked it free from the trunk, bark popping loose around it. "Trail's closed," he said. His voice didn't match his body. It was soft, calm, practiced, the kind of voice people use when they want you to let your guard down. The map didn't show any closures, I managed. He tilted his head like I'd given him an answer he wasn't expecting. Then he took another step toward me, dragging the axe along the ground. Leaves parted around the blade like they didn't want to touch it. "Turn around," he murmured. "Not safe up there." His eyes flicked past me for a split second, like he was checking if someone else was coming down the trail. When he didn't see anyone, something in his posture shifted, like he'd just made a decision. That was the first moment I understood. He didn't want me going forward, but he didn't want me going back either. I forced myself to look confident, like I wasn't panicking inside my skin. "I'll head back to the main fork," I said. "Didn't mean to bother you." His smile returned barely noticeable, but enough to make my throat tighten. "You already did." He stepped sideways, blocking the trail behind me with his body. He wasn't huge, but there was a weight to the way he moved that made him seem bigger. He lifted the axe, not threateningly, just adjusting his grip, testing it, feeling it, the way someone might before using it again. I didn't even think. I bolted off the trail. Branches snapped against my arms as I pushed into the brush, moving fast but trying not to look like I was running for my life. I could hear him moving behind me, slow, steady steps, crushing leaves in a straight line. He wasn't rushing. He didn't need to. The forest felt tighter here, like the trees were growing closer together. I ducked under low branches, stepped over roots, slid down a short slope, trying to stay quiet. But every step I took felt impossibly loud. Then I heard him laugh. Not loud, not wild. Just a quiet little chuckle, like he was amused by the whole thing. That was the moment my heartbeat changed. Not fast, but shallow, like my body was trying to shrink itself to make less noise. Eventually, the footsteps faded. The brush behind me went still, and silence wrapped around the woods again, this time heavier, like a lid closing on a box. I stayed frozen behind a fallen log for what felt like an hour. In reality, maybe 5 minutes. Long enough for sweat to chill along my back. Long enough to start imagining his face appearing between the branches. When I finally looked up, I realized the forest looked different. The slope had funneled me into a narrow ravine with steep walls on both sides. I hadn't noticed while escaping. Now it hit me. I couldn't climb out. Not quickly, not without noise. A bad place to hide. Then I heard voices. Not his. More of them. Up above me, maybe 50 yards ahead. Shadows moved along the ridgeline. At first I thought they were hikers. Relief washed through me until I realized they weren't carrying backpacks. They weren't talking normally. They were murmuring, low, rhythmic, like a chant without words. I crouched lower, breath pressing tight against my ribs. One figure paused at the edge of the ravine, looking down into it. Not at me, but searching, scanning, like they knew something was supposed to be there. A stick snapped behind me. I didn't turn. I didn't breathe. For a moment, the forest gave me nothing but stillness. Then another footstep. Closer. The Axeman hadn't given up after all. I could feel him behind me before I heard him. That same steady breathing. The same methodical steps crushing the leaves with no attempt to hide them. He was pushing me toward the group above without having to say a word. I stayed crouched, hands digging into the dirt. The ridgetop figures began moving again faster this time, as if responding to a signal I couldn't see. Coming toward the ravine's edge, coming down the slope. I had nowhere to go. Behind me, the man with the axe. Ahead, the silent group closing in, their shadows stretching long down the walls of the ravine. The last thing I remember clearly is the way the light dimmed as their shapes blocked the sky above me, and the feeling, not a thought, but a cold certainty that all three of us were part of something I didn't understand, and that I wasn't meant to be the one who survived it. The trees in northern Minnesota don't feel like the ones back home. They grow taller, closer together, and the light that slips through them always looks colder than it should, even in summer. That day, the air had a thin metallic edge, like the inside of a freezer right before it starts to hum. I remember my breath fogging just a little as I walked, even though it wasn't nearly cold enough for that. I told myself it was just in my head. You do that a lot out there. You keep explaining things away until the explanations feel thinner than the air you're breathing. I hadn't meant to go off trail. The plan was simple. Follow the loop, hit the scenic overlook, be back at the car before sunset. But at some point, I came to a fork where there shouldn't have been one. The official trail marker pointed left. A narrow, barely there path, beaten down by boots and deer hooves, slid off to the right. I don't know why I chose the right. Call it curiosity. Call it a bad impulse. Either way, the dirt felt softer under my boots, and the forest got quieter with every step. It didn't happen all at once. The birds didn't cut off mid-song like in movies. They just tapered out. The rustle of small animals in the brush faded. Even the wind seemed to hesitate between the trunks. The deeper I went, the more the silence started to feel like a substance, something thick pressed between the trees. The first time I noticed something was wrong was when I checked my phone. No signal, which I expected, but the time on the screen made no sense. I was sure I'd only been walking 30 minutes since the fork. The display said I'd been out for almost 2 hours. I laughed out loud, a short, dry sound that barely disturbed the air in front of me, and chalked it up to me misremembering when I'd started. But the laugh didn't feel honest, not even to me. I kept going anyway. At some point, the path disappeared under a carpet of pine needles and old leaves. I could still see where boots had pressed the ground before, but the trail wasn't clear anymore. It just became a direction, and then, slowly, not even that. I didn't notice when I stopped following it. I only realized I was lost when I turned around and didn't recognize the way back. The trees were too similar, the angles of light all wrong. I spun once, slowly, trying to make myself pick a landmark and stick to it. Every trunk looked like a copy of the last. I picked one anyway, a scarred oak with a long pale scratch down the bark, and started heading toward it. That's when I heard the first twig snap. It was off to my right, close, not the casual crunch of something wandering. There was intent in it. Wait. I froze, listening. Another snap, this time to my left. My skin prickled. When I swallowed, my throat clicked in the silence. I turned slowly, eyes trying to adjust to the shade under the pines. At first I saw nothing but vertical lines of bark and strips of darkness between them. Then a pair of eyes opened in the shadows. Yellow. Reflective, steady, a wolf stepped out from behind a trunk maybe 30 yards away. Its fur was gray, mottled with darker patches, ribs moving under the skin as it breathed. It didn't growl, didn't bare its teeth. It just watched me like I was something interesting it didn't quite understand yet. Then, to my left, another one stepped out, and another behind me. I turned a slow circle and counted at least 5 sets of eyes, maybe more. It was hard to tell where the forest stopped and the animals started. They moved in that half-light, keeping just far enough away that I couldn't see the full outline of their bodies. I've read that wolves aren't usually a threat to humans. I tried to remind myself of that while my pulse tapped against my neck. But I'd never read anything about them forming a ring like that. They weren't milling around, they weren't wandering. They were encircling. One of them took a few steps closer, paused silent on the needle-covered ground. I could see the slow rise and fall of its chest, the slight flare of its nostrils as it scented the air between us. I didn't know what to do. Run? No. You don't outrun wolves. Climb? The nearest tree had smooth bark and no low branches. Yell? Every instinct screamed to stay quiet, so I did nothing. Just stood there with my hands slightly raised, fingers shaking, trying to look non-threatening when every part of me was quietly panicking. The lead wolf's ears flicked back. It wasn't looking at me anymore. Its gaze shifted over my shoulder, past my head, into the trees behind me. Its body went rigid. The others followed one by one. Their attention slid off of me and locked onto something else. I didn't dare turn around. The forest had been quiet before, but now it felt like something had turned the volume down even further, like God had pressed his thumb over this one patch of woods. The air seemed thicker, heavier in my lungs. For a moment, the smell of pine and damp earth was drowned out by something else. Something faintly sour, like old cigarette smoke and cold ashes. One by one, the wolves stepped back, not turned and ran, not bolted. They backed away, eyes never leaving whatever was behind me. Their paws moved carefully, not breaking stride on any branch, as if they were afraid of making noise. The lead wolf's lips pulled back, just enough to show teeth not at me, but at the space over my shoulder. It gave a low, almost inaudible sound. Not a growl, more like a warning note. Then it broke first. The entire pack turned and slid into the trees, disappearing between the trunks in seconds. No howls, no fight, just gone. Leaving me alone with whatever had just made them decide I wasn't their biggest problem. My spine was crawling. I could feel sweat cooling in a line down between my shoulder blades. My mind felt like it was trying to push itself away from my skull, screaming to move, to run, to do anything except stand there. I turned. At first, I thought it was just more forest. More trees, more shadow, more of the same repeating pattern. Then my eyes adjusted, and I realized the ground dipped ahead, forming a shallow hollow between the trunks. In the center of that hollow was a circle of stones. They weren't natural. They'd been placed there, carefully, forming a rough ring about 6 or 7 feet across. Inside the ring, the ground looked darker, almost charred, but there was no recent fire, no ash on the wind, no smoke in the air. Not at first. Then a thin line of something rose from the center of the circle. Not gray, like campfire smoke. Darker, denser. It didn't drift the way normal smoke does. It climbed in a straight column for a few inches, then lingered, hanging in place like it was suspended on invisible strings. My throat tightened. It shouldn't have been there. There was no source, no heat, nothing burning, just that vertical line of black hanging over the dead center of the ring. I stepped closer without meaning to, drawn in by the wrongness of it. The air temperature shifted as I crossed the invisible boundary around the stones. One moment the forest was cool and damp. The next, a wave of stale warmth brushed against my skin like the inside of a sealed attic. The smell of ash grew stronger, edged with something sweet and rotten underneath. I stopped just outside the circle. There were marks on the stones. Not symbols I recognized, just long, vertical scratches. some deep, some barely skimming the surface, as if someone had dragged metal or bone down them again and again. My head felt light. I realized I'd been holding my breath. I sucked in a lungful of air to steady myself, and immediately wished I hadn't. The smell inside that circle was stronger, thicker. It didn't just sit in my nose, it crawled down my throat and settled in my chest. For a brief second, everything around me dimmed. The trees, the light, the ground beneath my boots, it all pulled away, like I was looking at it from a few steps outside my own body. And then, nothing. There's a gap there. One moment, I was staring at that impossible thread of black in the air. The next, I was sitting on a rock beside a completely different trail. Sunlight hitting my face from the wrong direction, my legs sore like I'd been walking for hours. My phone buzzed weakly in my pocket, 1 bar of signal. I checked the time. I'd been gone all day. My clothes were damp with sweat. My hands were dirty, like I'd fallen or crawled. There were pine needles stuck to my sleeves and in my hair, but I couldn't remember how I'd gotten from that stone circle back to a marked trail. I tried to recall the path, the turns, the landmarks, nothing. Just a blank space where a memory should have been. Later, when I finally made it back to my car and checked the map, I realized something else. The section of forest I'd wandered into wasn't on the park's official layout. There was just a blank, pale green shape where those trees should have been. No trails, no labels, like it wasn't part of the park at all. To this day, whenever I smell smoke in the woods, I get that same tight feeling in my chest. Not because I'm afraid of fire, because for a few minutes, standing at the edge of that stone circle, I think I wasn't entirely here, and whatever was watching me there, in that hollow where even wolves wouldn't step, might have been hoping I wouldn't find my way back. By the time this last one happened, I thought I understood the woods. I was younger than 18, last year of high school, and I still believed that if you went out with enough people, if you brought enough gear and joked loud enough around the fire, you could drown out anything that might be hiding just beyond the tree line. We went in late February, when most people weren't camping. The air in the Ozarks had that brittle chill to it, not quite winter, not quite spring. Me, my girlfriend Megan, my friend Colin, and his girlfriend Anne had been planning the trip for weeks. We wanted something big before everyone split off for college and jobs and whatever came next. We parked at a trailhead far enough from town that my phone dropped to no service within minutes. The world narrowed to the crunch of dirt under our boots, the creak of our packs, and the long dark shapes of bare trees stretching up into a washed-out sky. We got a late start, so that first night we stayed at one of the established sites near the main trail. Gravel tent pads, metal fire ring, a wooden picnic table someone had carved initials into years ago. It felt safe, civilized. We pitched 2 tents, me and Megan in one, Colin and Anne in the other, cooked cheap food over 2 hot coals, and fell asleep to the sound of distant wind in the branches. The real hike started the next morning. We broke camp early and headed toward a waterfall a few miles out, planning to push deeper after that and find a more secluded place to stay. The trail got narrower as we went, the trees closing in, the sound of traffic disappearing until the only noise was our breathing and the river somewhere below us. About an hour in, Anne started glancing over her shoulder every few minutes. At first, I thought she was just nervous. She wasn't as into this kind of thing as the rest of us. But then she slowed down, letting me and Megan pass, and whispered to Colin, loud enough that we all heard it, "He's back there again." We all stopped. "Who?" I asked. She bit her lip, scanning the trees. "The guy in the beanie. I've seen him 3 times now. He keeps ducking off when I look." We turned together, 4 sets of eyes sweeping the trail behind us. It was empty, just bare branches, and the gray sliver of the path winding back the way we'd come. Megan laughed it off, but it sounded a little too bright. "Probably just another hiker. It's a trail, Anne." "Then why does he keep hiding?" she shot back. No one had an answer for that. For a while after that, the mood changed. We didn't talk as much. Every time we heard footsteps behind us, we glanced back. Twice, I thought I saw movement, a shape slipping behind a tree just as I turned, but by the time my eyes focused, there was nothing there. By the time we reached the waterfall, we'd convinced ourselves Anne was just spooked. The beanie guy, if he existed, never stepped out into the open. The falls were barely more than a wide spill of water over rock, but we acted like it was some grand destination, taking pictures, shouting over the roar, trying to shake off the tension. Afterward, we followed a smaller side trail deeper into the forest, away from the main loop, until we found a flat spot near a narrow creek with clear, cold water. It felt tucked away, hidden, like we'd carved out our own little corner of nowhere. We set up camp as the light thinned, the sky turning the color of old bruises between the branches. That was when I saw her. I had just finished staking down one corner of our tent when something made me look up. Across the creek, on the opposite bank, someone was standing between the trees. At first, my brain tried to file her under a normal person. Just another hiker, maybe a ranger, but something was off in the proportions. She was tall, not basketball player tall, wrong tall. Thin, stretched, like someone had dragged the top of a normal person upward. The hoodie she wore hung off her frame in a way that made her limbs look too long. She wasn't moving, just standing there, head slightly tilted, watching us. "Hey!" I called, before I could talk myself out of it. My voice sounded too loud over the quiet gurgle of the creek. "Everything okay?" Megan followed my gaze and stiffened. Colin and Anne turned a second later. By the time all three of them looked, the trees were empty. "Dude," Colin said, squinting. "Who were you talking to?" "There was a woman there," I said. "She was right." I stopped. Pointing at nothing suddenly felt stupid. I could still see her in my mind, though. The way her head had been angled, like she was trying to memorize our faces. We brushed it off. We had to. The sun was dropping, and the temperature with it. We changed into dry clothes, waded briefly in a deeper pool downriver just to say we had, then came back shivering and laughing to start dinner. We'd packed well. Steak tips, vegetables, foil-wrapped potatoes. The kind of food that feels too heavy for the woods until you've been carrying 40 pounds on your back all day. The fire threw orange light up onto the trunks around us, leaving the spaces between them black and unreadable. Somewhere along the way, the conversation loosened. Colin pulled out a small bag of weed and papers, like he had on other trips. We rolled, passed, breathed in smoke and cold air until everything felt soft at the edges. For a while, it was perfect. Fire crackling, water moving slowly over rocks, Megan's head on my shoulder, Anne finally laughing again. The fear from earlier smoothed over. Then we heard it. A laugh. Not ours. This one came from the trees behind us. Close enough that it cut clean through our haze. High and thin. The kind of sound someone might make if they were trying to imitate a laugh they'd only ever heard described to them. I felt every muscle in my back lock. "What's so funny?" I shouted toward the dark, more bravado than anger. "Silence," Colin snorted. "Dude, relax. That wasn't me," I snapped. He shut up. We sat there listening to the fire chew through wood, our ears straining for any other sound. The forest, which had felt big and open a few minutes before, suddenly seemed too close. The trees leaned in. The dark between them felt thicker, like it could hold a person very easily. After a few minutes of nothing, we came up with a plan that sounded smart at the time. One of us would stay awake in shifts, on watch, like this was a movie and that would somehow fix everything. Nobody slept well. I had the last shift. Sitting outside the tent with the fire burned down to coals, my hoodie pulled tight, my fingers numb. Every time the wind brushed through the branches, I imagined that too tall woman stepping up to the edge of the light, her shadow falling over my shoes. Nothing happened. No footsteps, no more laughter. Morning came gray and washed out. We were all exhausted, eyes ringed, nerves stretched thin. For a while, we seriously considered packing up and heading straight back to the car. In the end, we compromised. We'd move closer to the exit, but not give up the rest of the weekend. Hike out a few miles, find a new site within easy distance of the trailhead, and call it good. On the way, we ran into another group of hikers. Middle-aged couple, their adult son. We ended up telling them about the laugh, about the guy Anne thought she'd seen, about the woman by the creek. They didn't take it lightly. The father kept looking over his shoulder as we talked. The son suggested we report it when we got back, just in case some weirdo's messing with people out here. We agreed, said we would, but none of us really meant it. You could hear that in the way the conversation trailed off. We split paths a little later and kept going, until we'd logged around 6 more miles and the light had started to thin again. We picked a site about 3 miles from the exit, near a bend in the trail where the trees opened just enough to see the sky. It felt better, closer to safety. That's what we told ourselves. We set up camp the same way as before, a little more efficient now that we were practiced. Fire, tents, food. As the sky went from gray to black, that familiar nervousness crept back in. Every crack of a branch made us glance up. Every shift of shadow near the edge of our firelight felt like it might resolve into a person. At some point, I volunteered to go a little way into the trees to pee, taking the handgun my dad had insisted I bring just in case. I didn't want to, but the idea of wandering off alone, unarmed, felt worse. The firelight faded behind me as I stepped into the dark. The cold hit harder away from the flames. I could see my breath faintly, thin clouds that disappeared as soon as they formed. I finished and was zipping up when I heard it, the dry crush of leaves under a heavy foot. My heart stopped in my chest. "Colin?" I called, trying to keep my voice level. "You out here?" No answer. Another step. Closer. The smell hit next strong, sour, like sweat soaked into fabric that had never been washed, layered over with something rotten and metallic. My fingers closed around the gun so hard they hurt. I pulled it out, hands shaking, and turned toward the sound. A figure stepped between the trunks. He was big, broad shoulders, long arms, clothes hanging off him in filthy folds. His hair was matted around his face, and his eyes caught what little light filtered through from our camp, reflecting it back in a flat, oily way. In his right hand, he held a machete. The blade looked dull and dark, edges nicked from hitting too many wrong things. He dragged it through the leaves as he walked, carving a shallow line in the dirt. He smiled when he saw the gun, like it was a joke. I screamed before I knew I was going to. My voice tore out of my throat, raw and high, cutting across the camp behind me. I saw Megan's silhouette jerk upright, heard Colin's voice shout something I couldn't make out. The man didn't stop. He lowered his head and charged. Time snapped into pieces. The next few seconds are just flashes in my memory. The weight of the gun in my hand, the recoil slamming into my wrists, the muzzle flash briefly lighting the trees, turning his face into a twisted white mask. The sound of Megan screaming my name. The smell of gunpowder mixing with that awful, stale stink. I fired until the slide locked back and my ears rang with a high, sharp whine. The man stumbled, faltered, and then turned, crashing through the branches and disappearing into the dark. I don't know how many times I hit him. I don't know how far he got. I just know he didn't fall where I could see him. We didn't chase him. We didn't go looking for blood or a body or answers. We ran. We grabbed what we could and shaking hands, phones, keys, a flashlight, the car fob, and half sprinted, half stumbled down the trail in the dark, leaving our tents and gear behind like they belonged to someone else. We didn't stop until we saw the pale rectangle of the trailhead sign and the dull shape of my car sitting alone in the gravel lot. That night we stayed in a cheap roadside motel with floral bedspreads and a broken ice machine. We dragged the dresser in front of the door and covered the windows with spare blankets, as if any of that would stop someone determined to get in. We talked about calling the police. We didn't. None of us wanted to answer the questions that came with, "I emptied a gun into a stranger in the woods and ran away." None of us wanted to go back there in daylight and point at the spot where it happened. So we didn't. We just left. Sometimes, when I think about that trip, I don't picture the man with the machete. I don't picture the gun, or the motel, or the dresser shoved up against the door. I picture the woman across the creek, standing too tall and too still in the fading light, and the man in the beanie Anne swore she saw, and the thin, wrong laugh in the trees. Like the forest hadn't just produced one dangerous person that weekend. Like it had been full of them, and we'd only bumped into a few. I used to think the woods were just a backdrop, a place you move through to get somewhere else, somewhere prettier, a viewpoint, a waterfall, a campsite with a nice flat spot for your tent. Now, when I think about trees, I don't picture any of that. I think about the gaps between them, the parts the light doesn't quite reach, the places where, for just a second, it feels like something is standing there, perfectly still, waiting for you to look away first. Those 3 trips weren't back to back. They were spread out over years. Different states, different trails, different versions of me. If you saw them on a map, they'd just be scattered pins stuck into empty green space. But in my head, they all sit in the same place, a kind of corridor lined with trunks and shadows and thin, breathless air. A man with an axe who didn't want me going forward or back. A pack of wolves that decided I wasn't worth the risk, but something else was. A laugh in the dark, and a faceless man stepping out of the trees with a blade in his hand. They don't feel like separate stories anymore. They feel like the same thing, saying the same message in 3 different ways. You don't belong here. Go home. Don't come back. I try not to romanticize it. These aren't paranormal adventures or some campfire legend I polish up to sound cool. They're just things that happened when I thought being alone in the woods made me brave instead of exposed. I'm alive because I ran, because I got lucky, because whatever was out there that day let me leave. Sometimes I wonder if that's all it was, just luck, just bad people in quiet places, just a weird dead zone on a map, just the kind of odds you eventually hit if you spend enough time walking where no one can hear you scream. Other times, I think about the details, the way the Axeman stepped aside just enough to block the trail, as if he'd done it before. The way the wolves backed away from an empty hollow and refused to look at what I couldn't see. The way that woman across the creek watched our fire like she was studying it, learning exactly how close she could get before we noticed. It's easy, in a living room or behind a screen, to shrug that off. To say, it's just the woods. It's just people. You're overthinking it. But there's a point out there under the trees where logic doesn't help you anymore. Where your body knows something your brain isn't ready to admit. This place is not neutral. It doesn't care if you make it back to your car. It doesn't care if anyone ever knows you were here. You leave footprints for a while. Then the wind smooths them out. Then the next rain comes, and the trail looks the same as it did before you were ever born. I still hike, sometimes, but I don't go alone, and I don't trust the quiet the way I used to. If a part of the forest feels wrong, I don't push through it to see what's on the other side. I turn around. I don't argue with that crawling feeling at the base of my skull when the birds fall silent all at once. If you've never felt that, it might sound dramatic. If you have, you know exactly what I mean. You don't have to believe my stories. You don't have to believe in anything at all. Just remember this the next time you find yourself miles from the nearest road, with only trees in every direction and your own breathing for company. If you ever feel the forest watching you, if the path suddenly seems thinner, if the air feels like it's waiting, if you get the sense that you've crossed some invisible line, don't argue with it. That feeling is the last polite warning you're gonna get. Because out there, in those stretches of silence that feel too focused, something is always paying attention. It has all the time in the world. And it's very good at noticing who walks in alone and who doesn't walk back out the same.